Okay, welcome everyone to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're diving into a stack of sources. These are excerpts from a pretty significant book, one that's definitely made waves.
Right.
And our mission really is simple. We want to cut through all the noise, pull out the most important insights, maybe find a few surprising facts, and basically give you a good handle on the core ideas, without you having to read every single page yourself.
Yeah, and the author's style is it's really key here. It's very conversational, loads of enthusiasm, definitely not dry or academic.
Right. Not pedantic at all.
No, he tackles these huge, serious topics, the kind of stuff you'd think needs dense philosophy.
Yeah.
But he does it with this, surprising ease.
It feels like he's just chatting with you, doesn't it?
Totally. Like he's saying, look, I've been wrestling with these big questions about being human, and I bet you have too. So let's talk about what I've kind of figured out.
Yeah, there's this real energy, almost the boyish enthusiasm for sharing what he's learned.
Mm-hmm.
And the material itself, it pulls from everywhere. Psychology, mythology, history, biology even. Lots of personal stories too.
Right. Those anecdotes really ground it.
It covers so much ground, but it keeps coming back to the central question, really. How do we live a meaningful life when things are, difficult?
And a lot of the groundwork for this, it actually comes from his earlier work, Maps of Meaning. That one was much more dense, academic.
Okay.
This book we're looking at today is more like an entry point, makes those big ideas more accessible.
And the core idea holding it all together right from the start is this really simple but deep truth. All of us, every single person,
Yeah.
no matter our background, genes, experiences, brain wiring, whatever, we're all fundamentally dealing with the unknown. We're trying to move from, chaos to some kind of order.
That's the basic reality he lays out, and it flows right into one of the huge themes. This deep, inescapable duality, order and chaos.
Okay, order and chaos. Let's break that down. Order is,
Order is the world we know. Stable, predictable. It's like your culture, your home, the floor you're standing on, the rules, your plans for tomorrow. It's essential. You need it.
but the source also points out that too much order, pushed too far,
Hmm.
that can become rigid, tyrannical even.
Exactly. Like a cage, not a hum.
Okay.
And then there's chaos. That's the unknown, formless potential. It's uncertainty, things falling apart, the unexpected happening.
Like the wilderness beyond the town walls.
Yeah, or a sudden illness, losing your job, plans going totally off the rails. It's where the monsters, real or imagined, might actually be.
And his point is, we don't live just in order or just in chaos. We're always in order, but chaos is always right there, surrounding us. We interact with it constantly.
And here's a key insight from the source.
Yeah.
According to the author, that feeling of deep meaning, like you're doing exactly what you should be doing,
Yeah, where did that come from?
it comes precisely when you're mediating between those two.
Yeah.
Standing right on the border, between the known and the unknown.
Ah, like an explorer at the edge of the map. That kind of feeling.
Yes, exactly that. It signals you're not just stuck in stagnant order, which gets oppressive, but you're also carefully, bravely expanding your, let's call it, habitable territory.
Personally, socially.
Personally, socially, even how you grapple with nature. It feels profoundly right because you're doing both things, keeping things stable and enabling growth.
Okay, that leads us into something pretty tough the source tackles head on. The reality of suffering.
Right, it doesn't pull any punches there. Suffering is presented as just, an integral part of being human. Unavoidable.
And this isn't some new idea, right? It's central to major religions, philosophies.
Absolutely. Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, they all grapple with this. Pain, anxiety, the source presents them as fundamental parts of consciousness.
And it's not just like natural disasters or getting sick.
No, it goes deeper. It really digs into the problem of evil, the suffering humans inflict on each other. So it's not just suffering from the world, it's this chilling ability people have to cause pain, sometimes even seeming to enjoy it.
That human capacity for self-deception, for real malevolence. He brings in literature and art that got him thinking about this. Asking, why are we like this? Why do we hurt each other?
And facing that reality, suffering, evil leads straight to another crucial point.
Right.
We absolutely need a system of value.
Why?
Because if existence is fundamentally hard and includes this potential for horror, then without some kind of profound value system, a hierarchy of what's good, what's important, what's not, then the horror just takes over.
And that leads to nihilism, that feeling that nothing matters, hopelessness.
Exactly. That's the path. We feel positive emotion, purpose, engagement when we're moving towards goals,
Right.
but setting goals, moving forward, making progress that requires value. You have to value something better than where you are now.
No, nothing has value.
Then you've got no direction, no motivation. The suffering just feels pointless, crushing.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, but related to structure. The source talks about dominance hierarchies, and it presents them as something incredibly real and ancient.
Yeah, like way older than human ideas like capitalism or patriarchy.
Yeah.
He argues this pattern goes back maybe 500 million years.
500 million, wow.
And he uses this really striking example, the lobster.
The lobster. Okay, tell me about the lobster.
So a lobster's brain chemistry, specifically the balance of serotonin and octopamine, it directly affects its posture, its confidence, its place in the lobster hierarchy.
Seriously?
Yeah. A winner, lobster, one that wins fights, gets more serotonin, stands tall, looks confident. A loser gets less, hunches over, avoids conflict.
And what's the connection to humans?
Well, here's the kicker. The source points out that SSRIs, the antidepressants humans take to boost serotonin, they've been shown to actually cheer up a defeated lobster, make it stand taller again.
No way.
Yeah, it's presented as this powerful illustration of just how deep these hierarchical mechanisms run. It's biological.
And in humans, low status. It's linked to low serotonin too.
That's the argument. Low status correlates with lower serotonin, more stress, less happiness, and statistically even a shorter lifespan. Being at the bottom of any hierarchy, social, or even just your own internal sense of competence, it's a rough, dangerous place to be.
And this isn't just about social status or money, is it? The source mentions the Pareto principle.
Right, that unequal distribution pattern. It shows up everywhere. Scientific papers, music composers, think Bach or Beethoven, producing so much of the enduring work, best-selling books. In domain after domain, a small percentage of contributors account for the vast majority of the output.
So it's presented as just a fundamental feature of reality, not necessarily something created by specific systems.
That's the assertion, yeah, an enduring pattern.
Okay, so navigating this complex world, especially today, has its own unique challenges, and the source offers some sharp critiques of modern views, like moral relativism.
Yeah, modern moral relativism. He digs into where that view comes from.
And what does he suggest?
Well, a few things. One is just learning about how wildly different moral codes have been across history and cultures. Another is how science has sometimes been interpreted, maybe misinterpreted, as undermining older religious or ethical systems.
And also this idea from some social sciences that you have to rigidly separate objective facts from subjective values.
Exactly. Like science tells you what is, but values are just, your opinion, man.
But the source really pushes back on that.
Oh, strongly. It argues facts and values are deeply intertwined. What you value actually shapes what you even perceive as a relevant fact. He sees science, in its quest for pure objectivity, as sometimes accidentally helping to devalue the essential role that values play in navigating reality.
Interesting. There's also a critique about a loss of practical wisdom, maybe particularly affecting younger generations.
Yeah, he suggests that maybe millennials are mentioned specifically, but that many have kind of suffered from intellectual and moral neglect, like not being properly taught or mentored in the kind of practical wisdom that helped earlier generations get by.
Because ideas like virtue maybe got dismissed as old-fashioned or restrictive.
Right. That's part of it. And he also critiques certain trends in academia, especially some humanities departments, for focusing maybe too much on ideological critiques, rather than really engaging with the deep wisdom in classic literature and foundational stories.
Okay, so let's talk about the dangers the source sees and how we actually act. Expedience and inauthenticity come up a lot.
Yes, expedience is basically taking the easy way out now. Avoiding responsibility, hiding problems, sweeping the skeletons into the closet.
The path of least resistance.
Right. But the argument is it doesn't work. The problem doesn't vanish. It just festers and grows in the dark. He says it produces a kind of demonic character in you, and you just end up transferring the suffering, often making it worse, onto your future self or others.
So the quick fix, the evasion,
Yeah.
it always bites you back harder later.
That's the idea. Absolutely. And inauthenticity, which includes lying to yourself or others, blaming people, it just makes everything worse. The source makes this really strong point. When you lie, you know you're lying.
Deep down.
Yeah, that internal feeling, that dissonance, it's there. Even if you try to ignore it or rationalize it, You know you're acting against what you perceive in that moment to be true or right. It corrupts your perception.
Wow, okay. This is definitely heavy.
Ah.
So, given all these difficulties, what kind of guidance does the source actually offer for living?
Well, a huge central theme is this call to shoulder the burden of being.
Shoulder the burden of being.
hmm
What does that mean in practice?
It means elevating the individual, taking on as much responsibility as you possibly can for your own life, sure, but also for your family, your community, the state of the world, even,
Wow.
by facing things directly, telling the truth, actively trying to repair what's broken around you, and having the guts to recreate things that need changing.
And the argument is this isn't just about being good, it actually reduces suffering.
That's the claim. It reduces suffering for you and for others. And the alternatives presented, just giving into chaos or desperately seeking authoritarian control to force order or just drifting aimlessly, those are seen as universally worse outcomes.
One of the most memorable bits of guidance, Rule 1 actually, is stand up straight with your shoulders back. Seems so simple, so physical.
It does, but the source connects it to something much deeper. A metaphysical stance, really.
So it's not just about looking confident?
Not primarily, no. It's incredibly symbolic. It's about voluntarily adopting the posture of someone who is willing to face the world, to accept the fundamental difficulty, the burden of existence and its challenges.
Instead of cowering or bracing for impact.
Exactly. Instead of curling up defensively, it's about occupying your territory not just physically, but psychologically, symbolically. He argues your whole nervous system responds differently when you choose to face demands voluntarily. You're poised not just to run from the dragon, but maybe to see what treasure it's guarding.
Okay. Another key rule is about relationships. Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Seems obvious, right? But the source really unpacks why this is harder than it looks. It specifically warns against this common, often misguided urge to rescue the damned.
Why is that impulse potentially problematic? It sounds compassionate.
Well, the source suggests it can seem like the easier path, or at least more emotionally rewarding at first. It might come from a genuine wish to help, sure, but it can also mask a kind of hidden self-importance, like, only I can fix this person.
Or maybe enabling their problems makes you feel needed.
Or superior, yeah. And he brings in psychological research here, pointing out that if you take a genuinely troubled or dysfunctional person and put them into a healthy, functioning group,
The group tends to go down, not the person up.
often, yes, the negative influence can be stronger. Think about, say, adding a really disruptive kid to a well-behaved class. It takes enormous effort to lift someone up, and it's much easier to be pulled down.
So choosing good friends requires real strength and judgment.
Exactly. Strength, discernment, courage, and protecting yourself from, uncritical compassion or pity that ends up harming both of you. He uses some really affecting personal stories about relationships with people called Ed and Chris to show how hard these choices can be and what the consequences are.
Then there's the rule about comparison. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Oh, this one is so relevant today. In our hyper-connected world, you can instantly compare yourself to literally billions of people. The hierarchies you see, online achievement, looks, whatever, they're incredibly steep. It's designed to make you feel inadequate.
Like being the best musician in your town versus seeing endless videos of world-class prodigies.
Precisely. It's overwhelming. So the solution offered isn't don't compare, but shift who you compare yourself to.
To your past self.
Right. It's presented as a practical, sane alternative. You can always aim to be slightly better today than you were yesterday. It doesn't require illusions about being the best in the world. And it also helps you deal with that inner critic.
That voice telling you you're not good enough.
Yeah. The source says, question that voice. Is it giving you useful feedback, or is it just the same old destructive chatter it aims at everyone? Learn to tell the difference.
What about feeling stuck, unhappy, overwhelmed? There's that analogy about the pile of papers.
Ah, yes, the dreaded pile of paper on the desk. Those tasks you keep putting off, maybe not because they're inherently difficult, but because you're afraid of failing or afraid of what finishing them might mean or reveal.
Right.
The source suggests that deep, persistent unhappiness often isn't just random bad luck. It might be coming from, like, faulty desires or a value structure that's actually blinding you.
How so?
You might be chasing something that isn't actually good for you or that clashes with your deeper needs so hard that you can't even see other possibilities. You're stuck because your aims are wrong.
So the work isn't just changing things outside, but recalibrating your internal compass.
Exactly. It means genuinely deciding you want things to be better,
Yeah.
which requires taking responsibility and doing that hard work of, as he puts it, cleaning up your psyche.
Facing the old resentments, the self-lies, the messed up
Yeah,
priorities.
letting rid of the debris.
And part of this involves organizing your desires into a value structure.
Yes. We all have basic desires, right? Food, safety, connection. But the world is complex. Desires conflict. The source argues you need to become conscious of them, articulate them, figure out what's more important, and arrange them into a hierarchy.
Like building a personal framework where different goals and needs actually work together.
Exactly. And crucially, work together with the desires of other people and the constraints of reality. This process transforms basic wants into something more sophisticated, something aimed at, well, the good. It elevates them into values, into morality. Your actions then show what you truly value.
The author talks about a really profound personal practice.
Right.
He adopted a commitment to telling the truth. Or maybe more accurately, not lying.
Yeah, he describes this period where he realized just how much maybe subtle inauthenticity had crept into his life. So he made this conscious decision. Only say things his internal voice wouldn't object to. Stop saying things that felt false.
And that was helpful.
Incredibly so, he says. It was difficult, forced, uncomfortable confrontations sometimes, but it became like a compass. Clear guidance when he didn't know what else to do. Just don't say things you know to be untrue.
He shares some pretty intense stories about that, right? Like with a hospital patient or that ex-biker.
Yeah, really challenging situations. Having to tell a terminally ill person they couldn't join his group, or dealing with a very disturbed, intoxicated guy trying to sell him a microwave late at night. These moments, he suggests, show that telling the truth isn't simple. It requires careful attention to the reality of that specific moment and real courage.
And this links back to sacrifice, doesn't it? Expedience avoids sacrifice.
Right. Expedience, the easy path, lacks faith, courage, sacrifice. It leads towards that demonic character. Meaning, though. Meaning isn't something you just find or create out of nothing. It's something that sort of comes upon you.
Yeah.
Typically, when you're balanced on that edge between order and chaos, taking responsibility, engaged with the world.
Then sacrifice is key to managing suffering.
Yes, that's a core argument. Sacrifice holds suffering at bay. And, the source argues, greater sacrifices are generally more effective. This isn't presented as just a religious idea, but something universally understood, encoded deep in our psychology and stories.
The ultimate sacrifice.
A willingness represented in myths and religious figures to sacrifice even what is most precious, yourself, your loved ones, if necessary, in service of a higher good. That's presented as the ultimate path to redeeming the world from suffering and evil, bringing about positive transformation.
Which brings us back, inevitably, to that huge question about suffering. Why? Why did God, if you believe in God, create a world with so much pain? Dostoevsky's Ivan Karamazov asked this.
He does, and the author offers a really personal reflection here, using his own son, Julian, as an example.
What was the realization?
He realized that what he loved most about his son, his vulnerability, his fragility, his uniqueness, was completely inseparable from his limitations. If you made him invincible, like some kind of titanium robot, you'd destroy the very essence of what made him lovable.
So limitation isn't just a bug. It's maybe a feature. Necessary for being, for story, for love itself.
The source suggests that might be the case. And he uses the powerful real-life example of his daughter, Mikhaila, and her lifelong struggle with severe juvenile rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
Her life involved constant, unavoidable pain, facing the limits of medicine. Her journey, having to learn to give herself injections as a young child. It's presented as this stark example of encountering profound suffering and limitation, and choosing to take responsibility within that harsh reality. Existence and limitation, they seem bound together.
Okay, changing focus a bit. The source also talks about parenting and discipline, challenging some modern ideas.
Definitely challenges any sort of naive view that kids are inherently good and just need to be left alone. It argues really strongly for rules, structure, discipline.
But not harshness.
No, administered with care, not tyranny, but absolutely essential, not to crush creativity, he argues, but to actually enable it, and crucially, to enable social development.
And there's a specific point about teaching compliance by around age 4.
Yeah, this is presented as really critical. Because after age 4, peers become the main socializers. If a child hasn't learned basic social skills, how to play by the rules, how to negotiate, They risk rejection by other kids.
And that rejection is serious.
Very. The source sets research showing rejected kids can fall behind developmentally, become lonely, antisocial, depressed later on. It's a major risk factor. And it adds a warning to parents, too, about their own hidden resentment maybe coming out as overly harsh or neglectful punishment.
Conflict also gets attention. Using personal stories again.
Yes, various anecdotes. His father dealing with disputes during family moves, stories about his friend Chris acting out deep resentment, breaking mirrors, burning dinner intentionally.
Oh.
And these are contrasted with the extreme, tragic example of the Columbine shooters, fueled by immense resentment and a total dehumanization of others. These all illustrate different ways conflict and resentment manifest.
So what's the constructive approach?
The source suggests it's a skill you have to learn. Know what you actually want, be able to articulate it clearly, make specific requests, and, importantly, start by assuming ignorance or incompetence in the other person before jumping to malice.
Give them the benefit of the doubt first.
Right. Don't immediately assume the worst.
And finally, on practical guidance, there's that story about the kids climbing the construction crane.
Yeah, that's a striking one. He observed these kids weren't focused on safety, they were actively seeking competence by tackling a real danger, pushing their limits.
So the argument is,
That genuine competence is what actually makes people safe in the long run. Avoiding all risk doesn't build the skills or resilience needed to handle the dangers that life inevitably throws at you.
okay, let's zoom out now and look at some of the wider cultural, religious, philosophical ideas the source engages with.
Sure, it touches on evolutionary psychology, things like female mate selection shaping male evolution, or the theory that our vision is highly tuned to spot snakes because they were an ancient threat.
And there's a point about gender differences that might be controversial for some.
Yes, the source argues, based on the data it cites, that gender differences in personality and interests have a biological basis. And perhaps counterintuitively, these differences appear larger, not smaller, in societies with greater gender equality, like in Scandinavia.
So presenting that as evidence against the idea that gender is purely a social construct.
That's the assertion made in the source material, yes.
It also dives really deep into myth and ancient stories.
Absolutely. Biblical narratives, Eden, the fall, Cain and Abel, Christ's story, Egyptian myths like Horus versus Set. He sees these not just as old tales or religious doctrine, but as symbolic representations of incredibly profound observations about being itself.
About sacrifice, good versus evil.
Right. And the evolution of human consciousness, moving from purely instinctual behavior to being able to represent knowledge and morality in stories.
The source offers a pretty complex view of Christianity, doesn't it? Recognizing positives, but also critiques.
Very much so. On the positive side, it credits Christianity with elevating the individual soul, the idea of equality before God, which eventually led to equality before the law, and pushing back against ancient barbarism.
But the critiques,
That rigid dogma could sometimes lead to devaluing this life in favor of the next, or a kind of passive acceptance of suffering. It's God's will. Maybe even avoiding personal moral responsibility because Christ's sacrifice was seen as doing all the work.
and he uses Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor story.
Yes, as a powerful literary critique of how institutions, even the church, might try to lighten the incredibly difficult burden of freedom and moral choice that figures like Christ actually represented, taking away the hard path of individual responsibility.
And the source connects the decline of Christian belief in the modern West.
To
What?
a vacuum being created, widespread nihilism, loss of meaning. And this, the argument goes, made societies vulnerable to new secular utopian ideologies like communism and fascism, which offered a replacement meaning and hierarchy, but a terrible, destructive one.
Interesting. What about the logos? Reason, the word.
The logos is presented almost like an archetypal savior figure, an extension of evolution, really. It's the human capacity to articulate reality, to confront problems with language and thought.
Allowing ideas to die instead of people.
Exactly, drawing on Karl Popper. The idea is that through reason and debate, we can test our ideas against reality, let the bad ones die, rather than us having to physically perish when our actions based on flawed ideas fail. Faith in this process, he suggests, is fundamental to thinking itself.
Carl Jung's ideas also feature, especially about moral hierarchy.
Yes, Jung observed that humans inevitably structure their world through a moral hierarchy. We can't help it. And whatever you put at the very top of your hierarchy, consciously or not, that functions as your God.
Your ultimate value.
Right. And that enacted belief shapes your entire personality, your actions. Pitting archetypes against each other, the hero aiming for good versus the adversary aiming for destruction. Christ versus Satan in symbolic terms. It's presented as just how our psychology works.
The source also critiques some postmodern ideas.
Yeah, it engages with figures like Derrida and certain postmodern Marxist views. The critique presented is that these perspectives can be fundamentally nihilistic or destructive
How so, according to the source?
by casting radical doubt on our ability to categorize the world to make meaningful distinctions, and by tending to view all distinctions, biological sex, earned competence, skill hierarchies, purely as oppressive power dynamics. The source argues this undermines the very possibility of seeking truth or making constructive moral judgments.
Okay. And lastly, wealth inequality gets mentioned,
Yes, it's acknowledged as a real problem, a potential threat to stability,
but with a caveat.
a strong one, that easy solutions aren't obvious, and that historical attempts at forced redistribution, citing examples like the Soviet actions against the kulaks, often led to horrific outcomes and different kinds of tyranny. It highlights the complexity and the danger of simplistic solutions.
Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of ground. So, after digging through all this dense, fascinating material, what does it all mean for you, the listener, tuning in today?
Well, these ideas, pulled from so many different places, they're not just abstract theories. They offer really powerful ways to understand the basic challenges we all face, right?
Frameworks for understanding.
Yeah. They can help you figure out why things might be going wrong in your own life. Maybe it is external chaos, sure, but maybe it's also something about your internal setup, your values, the truths you might be avoiding.
So tools for understanding yourself, your relationships.
Exactly. And offering practical principles, challenging ones, definitely, but principles for finding a way forward, even when things are uncertain and suffering is part of the deal.
It really seems to circle back to that core message, doesn't it? Taking responsibility, facing difficult truths, especially about yourself, and consciously aiming for something better, aiming for the good, in a world that guarantees suffering and chaos.
Yeah, the source isn't promising like easy happiness. It's promising a path of meaningful struggle, maybe. Strength in facing reality head on.
So we've journeyed through this source material, explored these deep ideas about suffering, value, responsibility, truth, the whole human condition.
It's definitely a challenging perspective, but the aim seems to be equipping you, the listener, with insights to navigate life's complexity and tragedy with perhaps more courage and more competence.
All right, so here's a final thought for you to chew on, drawn from these pages. If the source suggests that really confronting your own capacity for darkness, for malevolence, actually makes you less afraid of the world's horrors and maybe more able to resist actual oppression, well, what hidden strengths might you find if you honestly looked at the parts of yourself you usually avoid or deny?
Or maybe think about this. Given the argument for these deep, ancient roots of order, chaos, hierarchy, how might focusing your energy on building genuine competence in your life and deliberately trying to align your actions with what you truly perceive as the highest good, how might that be the single most practical, effective way to bring meaning and positive change into your own life and maybe the world around you too?
Lots to think about. We really encourage you to continue your own deep dive into these profound ideas.